Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Doomer Optimism podcast. I am here with Joseph, the Homestead Padre, and I feel like he's been in our Doomer Optimism circles for so long, and I just felt like this is such an oversight. He should have been on the pod at some point. He's been a teacher in my classes. He's like an inspiration for so many people. A lot of times when people are listing off people in the doomer optimism sphere, they're like, yeah, like Padre, he does such good stuff. He's so impressive what he can accomplish. So I figured let's get him on. Let's talk about his, homestead life, his journey there, and, just chit chat. So let's start, Padre, by having you just kind of introduce yourself, talk a little bit about how you got into homesteading or why, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. My name is Joseph, everybody, if you don't know. I started homesteading. I got interested about 12, 13 years ago. I lived inner city in central North Carolina. Was in a poverty area, worked a job where I made minimum wage, struggled with food, things like that. It really come about, I guess, 2008 with the market crashes and everything. That hit my job hard and my finances hard. And I got to thinking about other means of providing for myself other than going to work 9 to 5, buying everything at the grocery store and whatnot. So I took this little journey back in time one weekend over a lot of alcoholic beverages. When I was younger, my mom would send me to my great-grandmother's house in Virginia for the entire summer. And Grandma Dean had acre and a half garden. And that's all I did from sun up to sundown. She had me work in that garden, pulling weeds, picking vegetables, picking bugs off plants. And I hated it. Oh, I hated it. I'm talking from 8 years old to maybe 14 years old. That's where I spent every summer.
Yeah.
And then when I got into high school, we had a little garden out back. Nothing fancy. We wasn't replacing groceries or anything. Just stuff we wanted tomatoes, cucumbers. And I was like, I'm gonna take all that and I'm gonna plant a garden. And, I remembered nothing. I really, other than actually physically doing labor, I remembered nothing about gardening. My first year was, so our backyard was completely shaded out all day long, just big hickory trees everywhere. My first garden failed at everything, just absolutely. We're talking summer of 2008, 2009, I've been 2009. And so I walked to the local library, just started reading books, every book I could find on gardening. And that led me into, I found some books from the 70s on homesteading. And I got to reading those and I got interested in that. And I was like, I think this is the life that I want. I think I really want to try this. So that's kind of the beginning of where I'm at now, of my whole.
Okay, so going back, did you said your grandma had a big garden. Talk to me a little bit about like we had a whole episode called Grandpa Stories, and it was like people talking about what it was like with their grandpas and the kind of things that they showed them. Like, did you have a family history of just like a kind of subsistence, kind of homesteading? Was that common across your family outside of your grandma? Did you feel like your generation kind of moved away from it, or like your parents? What's the whole background story with that?
Really, my parents did. So my great grandpa died before I was born. He was a coal miner. He died of black lung, and it was really my great grandmother. None, my grandma, my great aunts, great uncles, none of them did that. They all left the rural mountains of Virginia, headed to Winston-Salem, Greensboro, or one of the bigger cities, and they completely left the rural lifestyle. So I was not raised whatsoever in that. My grandparents on my dad's side, they had some chickens. Once my grandpa retired, he built a chicken coop, but they did. I don't even think they had a garden that I could remember.
Okay.
So no, it's
So was there like now that you're back doing this, is there any conversation with your family like, what are you doing? We left this or no?
No, I don't really talk to or hear from them, but
Okay.
everybody. It was one of those when great grandma died and then my grandmother died. Everybody just kind of dispersed.
I get it. Yeah.
No contact with each other.
And then another background question I have for you is the following. A lot of people I talk to, men and women both, say like they can't find somebody who would be into homesteading. Like, for example, a young man, like, I can't find a wife who would be like on board with this. And it's usually in that direction that I've talked to, at least, like men who can't find women who will be on board. So I'm curious, how did it go with your wife and family? Like, how did you negotiate that? Like, we want to go rural again. How did she get on board? And yeah, I want to hear a little bit about like what it's been like with the kids too.
So Melody had a little bit more. She was raised very rural, probably more rural than I was. I didn't think that was possible. But she wasn't in the gardening or anything like that. But her grandmother did it, so she had the memories of it. And then we moved to South Mississippi. We moved into the city. The first week there was a drive-by on our road. Drug house, a couple houses down. Fast forward 3 months, and we come home to a bullet hole through the window.
Oh my God.
And we were like, we're done with this. So pre-Katrina, we both had lived in her in the Army. She went to the Mississippi base for training, and me calls my dad. And that's why we decided to come here. First, I liked it here. We were here before. I had family down. She doesn't really have family at all. And so, yeah, we were in the city 3 months, and we were like, we got to get away. So yeah. It didn't. In the city, I had planted a garden. So I did still have that aspect going on, and she was cool with it as long as she wasn't. I say she wasn't doing much, but she was a trooper. She dug like a 300 square foot garden area with a paddock by hand. Like, she got out there just at it.
Yeah.
No, it was just luck of the draw. We found where we're living at now on Craigslist.
Really?
And it was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, 3 acres of land, $700. And that's what we were paying in the city for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath on a little lot. So got out here, talked to the guy, older guy, liked him a lot. He liked us. And so we moved in October. And we didn't do anything from October till February or March. We're 2013 going into 2014. So I asked him that March, I was like, can I have a garden? I get 3 acres of land here. Can I cut out a little stuff? And at this point in time, we've already been going to farmers markets, buying food, canning food. So we'd already been getting into the part of the homesteading lifestyle. We just don't produce it.
Yeah.
So he's like, yeah. He's like, as far as I'm concerned, if you're paying rent, that's yours. You do whatever you want.
Oh, that's cool.
I was like, okay. So first year we had a garden, and that March I did a whole little garden area, probably 1,000 square feet. And my wife was like, I want chickens. And I was like, all right. So let me go talk to the landlord. He's like, I done told you, do whatever you want back there. As long as you're paying rent, it's yours.
Yeah.
Okay. So 5 chickens that year. Then come August, a guy I worked with had goats. He had to get rid of some. He had too many. He's like, you want it? Take it. So again, I called my landlord. He's like, man, I done told you. So I very fortunate what we as far as a landlord doing that. I know Jordan rents.
Yeah, Jordan.
So the rental is a possibility. We've been here 10 years now. Be 11 in October, and this year we're actually living in Pine.
Nice.
He's 69 years old. He doesn't want to deal with it anymore, and he's like, I've already paid me about 80 grand. He goes, I'm thinking 70, 80 grand for the rest of
Oh my God. Wow.
it. Yeah.
Wow.
So we made that transition, which is great because our daughter came home from the hospital here, and my wife's like, "Want to leave home or she come home?" Well, that's the next journey. I've never bought from home,
Yeah.
so that's my next
Yeah. I just
crazy.
want to say it's like crazy. I think a lot of people don't realize this, but there are a couple of people in our sphere who have done rental, and it's fine. You know, it's fine. You can use parcels of land. Sometimes it's with a home or without. Like Jordan Hedberg, he like rented a home separately and then was renting out parcels of land and like running a grass-fed beef business on rented pieces of property. It's also very common in agriculture to rent land to use. The only problem, of course, is then your margins of like what you produce. If you're renting, you know, a piece of land even separate from a home, then you have to make sure you're like earning enough, and it's hard to earn enough on the land you use. But Jordan, I think, does a really good business. And in your case, the land like came with the rental property of the home that was the same as the city. So that's definitely a possibility. A lot of people say like, I can't get onto any land, like I wouldn't be able to afford it. And I think they should try to think outside the box a little bit, especially if you can think about what you're paying in the city, and you can find a lot of rural places for a lot cheaper than what you would be paying for rent in the city. And then obviously there's the question of work, you know, but
yeah, I try to encourage people, like, you know, especially people getting into homesteading. I might find a place in the country. Most rural landlords will let you grow a garden and have 3 or 4 chickens. You know, that is enough to get a taste
mhm.
of it and try it out for a couple of years.
Yeah,
And if you like it, then you can move on the bigger plan. Because how many people buy property, they're going to homestead 2 years later, they're way over their head, and now they're stuck with all this stuff.
right. Yeah. And then if you rent, it's just kind of like, okay, well, I tried it. This wasn't for me. You know, I'm going to leave when my lease is up or whatever. Gives you a little chance to try it out. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk more about how did this evolve from 2013 in terms of your practices, the kinds of things you guys got into. I know you do more so than other people in our sphere, do like all sorts of products, the candles, the soaps. Talk to me about like how you got into all of those different things, because I think for a lot of people they just think like, I just don't know anything. How can I get into this stuff? You know, and so encourage us about how to like be self-taught, but also just experiment and try stuff out. And then, yeah, tell us what you specifically did. That would be fun to hear.
So, brief background going into it. So, my daughter was born in 2014
Okay.
in June. It was like February of that year. We saw a documentary about processed foods. And my wife was like, we come out of that documentary. My wife was heavier than me on it at first. She was like, I'm feeding my daughter all this junk. You know, she's like, baby eats what I eat, and we got all these chemicals and preservatives. I was like, all right, so we kind of shifted to an organic based diet. And I'd already started thinking at that point. I was like, well, next year's garden's bigger because we can't afford organic.
Right.
So we kind of went that route, and then we watched another documentary about the chemicals that's in your shampoo, in your soap, in your household.
Mm.
So it was kind of like in all these Netflix documentaries. And I got to thinking, I was like, it's like I don't want any of that with my family. So I started doing my own research. Got on the internet, I found hundreds of books, studies and manufacturer claims, and FDA government claims, and alternative research claims. So I finally made the decision that, you know, we're just going to get this. We're going to get rid of all this. And I was a consumer. I was going to farmers markets. I was looking for handmade soaps. I was looking for. There's a guy at a farmers market that I'm at now. He sells laundry detergent. He makes 5-gallon buckets of it. He sells. And So, well, that's expensive. And I was like, well, how can we do this ourselves? And then we got thinking about all the products in place. So, shampoo, household cleaners, processed foods. Look, we even ripped the carpet out of our house after we found out all the chemicals. And we got fortunate. Our septic tank backed up into the house. Called the landlord, and I was like, "Can I just rip the carpet out?" And he's like, "Yeah, just rip it out." But I was able to get rid of that, so that was. But we, yeah, just a couple documentaries stuck it in our heads, a lot of internet research, and when I actually got to the point of doing it, YouTube. YouTube was my best friend. I wasn't on Facebook. I wasn't on Twitter. I really had no social media. So YouTube's where I went to find it.
Yes.
It's easier than the library, and I can watch somebody show me how to do it.
Right, right. And okay, so what do you think about a lot of times when I talk about, all this homesteading self-production stuff, and I say a lot of it has to do with like, I don't want to feed my kids X amount, this kind of food. I don't want to be like just exposing myself to this amount of chemicals. People will say, oh, that's like, bougie or lib or whatever. Like, and so I wonder, and then my response is just, I think about my neighbors in Uruguay who are like, kind of traditional family, small scale family farmers. And the way that they access alternative products is they make it themselves, and then it's actually very cheap. But a lot of people say, well, I just can't afford organic, or I can't afford like these fancy soaps and stuff like that. And that's just like something rich people should care about. So I wonder your thoughts on the class question, because we get that a lot. Like only rich, bougie consumers can care about this kind of stuff. And in my experience, that's not true. But yeah, I wonder what your retort to that is.
We are raised to be consumers,
right?
In America,
yeah,
in Western society. If you want it, go buy it. Work hard, make money, go buy it. Right. So yeah, I ran into that. I can't afford this.
Right.
And that's exactly what drove me into making this.
Right.
So people that do that, I'm going to sound mean and say it. To me, it almost sounds lazy. It's easier to buy your way out. You have the right persons. So let me go line. I make more money. It takes me to cook it, store it, stir it, shake it, set it. It's about 4 hours. And I'm getting about 5 gallons, and I spend about $5. You can't get that.
Right.
I don't care if you're about cheap stuff. You're not going to get it. But you got to do it. You have to take the 30 minutes to shave the soap I use soap that I made as base. So I have 6 weeks in my soap. Then I shave that, and it takes 30 minutes to shave down. Then you get that pot down and go from there. I think some people just don't want to do it. Like, I don't think some people don't care, and that's fine. I don't want to work it. But they still should kind of act like I guess it's almost the hot topic to act like you care about this thing. And I know people personally can talk it, and in the background they don't care.
Right.
And that's fine. But you don't have to make an excuse and drag other people, because I've seen them drag people. Oh, you don't half a day to make just good, which is fine. I mean, that's my income.
Right.
So yeah, it exists. It's you gotta have money to do it. Because I'm not going to sell you a bar soap for $1. I'm going to sell you $6.
Yeah.
I have the time and the energy. A batch of soap takes 6 weeks.
Right.
So ready, you're going to pay me for that. So it's.
But if you do it yourself, then that's the time maybe you would be spending doing something else, like leisure activity, whatever, you know, where you're like, okay, well, I could do this if I have the extra time and save myself the money. Then it's a different thing. It's a different calculation. I also think like a lot of people I mean, I know some people work really long hours, but a lot of people like just aren't used to any kind of self-production and just think like either it's inaccessible to me or I don't have time to do that or I don't even know how to get started. So then they come up with these excuses and act like it's just a class thing. But I think, yeah, they really just haven't.
Yeah. It's a valid point because I told a guy the other day, I was like, you watch Netflix or anything like that? Do you have a TV show? He was like, yeah. I was like, in the time it takes you to watch one TV show, sitting on the couch, I can cook up a batch of stuff.
Right.
And get it poured in the mold. So, you know, it's time management. It's what do you want to do for fun? We all need leisure. We all need time to read a book, or every night I sit down for like an hour for 9 o'clock just to get my mind up. It's just, but how many people will come home and watch 3 hours? Or,
right.
I'm 40 years old. I still play video games. I know there are other 40-year-olds. But you can't take 30 minutes of your time out of that to do something. But again, you touched on a point. I don't think a lot of people have the confidence to do something.
Yeah.
I was so nervous. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm messing with lye. You got to add lye to water first, because if you add water to lye, it's going to explode. You know, it's intimidating. And you're not used to it.
Wait, Padre, let's turn our videos off and put your mic a little closer to your mouth. Let's turn videos off so I can hear you a little better. Okay, so I would love to hear, talk me through the first time you made soap. How did you how did you find out what to do? And then talk me through how you actually did it. You know, just give us an idea of what it's actually like, because I think that's a very rare skill in our group. I mean, some people make soap, but it's not very common.
Google. I found the recipe on Google.
Okay.
It wasn't a great recipe, but it was one that worked.
Okay.
So, and I'm reading the warnings about lye and all this stuff. I'm like, they're talking about, you got to do this step right, or it's going to explode if you get it on your hand. It's going to eat your skin. So I'm sitting here with goggles and latex gloves, and I look like I'm in a laboratory. I take everything outside, like I'm doing it in the house. And I'm so scared of this stuff. And I read the instructions 5 times on do I add lye to water, or do I add water to lye?
Yeah. So
I put the lye in the water, and I jump back. Like, I get back really quick. I don't know what's happened. And I'm sure, looking back on it, it's very common. I got the kids in the house. I'm like, y'all can't come outside and watch this. The dad figures out what he's doing. And that way, if anybody is injured, I'm the only dumb one here.
Right.
So get that mixed, and then I see steam coming out, and I'm like, there's the deadly toxic vapors. Because the article I read was like warning you against it.
Right.
So I got my respirator on from when I worked in the shop with sawdust and everything. So I have my respirator on, trying to keep the fumes out. And nothing happened. The glass jar got really, really hot from the chemical reaction. And I was like, okay. So after I felt safe enough, and I had the thermometer in there, and I was checking the temperature, because you got to reach it. Your oil's got to be a certain temperature. Your lye water has to be. And once everything matched, I'm carrying this jar inside the house, like as far away from my body as possible. Like, I'm only going to lose my left hand here. Like, still write stuff.
Yeah.
And got in there, poured it in the oil, got the stirring, and then I started watching all the magic happen. And this particular recipe was straight vegetable oil from the grocery store. And I watched it turn into this cream color. Then I put a hand mixer in there. I'm moving it around, and I'm getting this pudding consistency. I'm like, this is everything the instruction says.
Okay.
And I'm starting to get excited at this point.
Right.
Like I'm doing it. And I don't remember what I did wrong, but that first batch failed.
Oh, really? Okay.
I cannot. It's been so long ago. The first batch failed. So we tried it again, same day. Pulled everything back out. I was like, all right, round and got it going, and it looked good. It looked perfect. And poured it in the molds, set it on the shelf for 24 hours to cool, pulled it out of the molds, and I did it. I had soap. And I was reading, I was like, you got to let it set 4 to 6 weeks. I was like, man, I don't want to wait that long. So I cut it, was letting it set, used 1 bar immediately. It didn't work so well, so I got disappointed. And there was a lot of impatience in that.
Right.
And I tried a bar every week for 6 weeks. At that point, I was experimenting to see what the difference was.
Right.
And I could really see the soap coming together. By week 4, week 5, it was looking like soap. It was sudsing up real pretty. It just smelled really bad. Again, because it was just vegetable oil and lye water. It'll clean you.
Right.
Man, it went like a really nasty smell. I call it the clean smell. You didn't get the clean smell.
Okay.
For me, that's something florally or something sweet, or I think soap has its own smell as it is. So
right.
when I used grocery store soap, Gain was my product. Gain smelled clean. So yeah, it smelled like burnt oil. That's what it smelled like. So it worked.
Yeah, okay, it got you clean. And so then what happened with your soap making over time? Like, did you change the recipe? Did you add more scents to it to try to approximate that soap smell that you were used to, or how did you adapt over time then?
Sorry, coughing.
Okay.
I was like, it worked, but it didn't work well. It worked well. It just wasn't what we wanted. So I did a lot more research, and I was like, well, do I have to use vegetable oil? And basically any fat works.
Okay.
So we started experimenting with sunflower oil, coconut oil. We used coconut oil. That's the only oil base for the longest time.
Okay.
And then my wife was getting into essential oils. So we started playing with that, throwing different essential oils in there, the mica clay for color. And it was really a process over about 3 years of colors and smells and figuring out how to blend different essential oils to create different smells. And it was one big science experiment.
Yeah. And sorry, go ahead.
I took the basic recipe. If it was, I don't remember it now, but if it was 3 cups of vegetable oil, I was like, all right, let's do 2 cups of coconut and a cup of olive. And, we just really started playing around with it like that.
Right. And honestly, I would just encourage people like listening to this story. I think this is how it goes for all of us and for most of this stuff. Like basically a lot of us are just trying to relearn skills that were lost. Over the course of a couple generations, just were lost. And it's going to be a little bit, stop and go to get those skills back and to like make it how you want it to be. But it's fun too, it's fun. And then in the end, you're like, look at us. We like actually are self-sufficient in this thing. In a way that we never were before, and like learned a lot of skills, now can teach other people skills, which you did in the home economics class and homesteading class, like teaching other people these skills, or at least encouraging them, like you can basically do it. This is not rocket science, but it does take some process of like intention where you actually sit down and try to do a thing, and keep iterating on it. Um, Another thing I wanted to ask you about, if we're done on the soap for now, is you're the small garden king. In my homestead class, you're the small garden guy. Um, so I'm wondering if you can talk to us about like your small garden philosophy, basically. I know you can produce a lot in a small amount of space. And I think another thing in terms of access, a lot of people say they can't get, they can't get onto some land or whatever. But you say, just get going with a garden and you can produce a lot in a small amount of space and then just feel like very empowered by that. So yeah, talk to us about your small garden philosophy a little bit. That'd be fun.
I am a huge fan of intensive gardening, and what that is the most amount of food in the least amount of space, right? So I studied all different things before I got to this point. I studied square foot gardening. I studied back to Eden gardening, food forests. Just if it was there, I researched it, and I come up with, which apparently I'm not the only person to come up with this, but I credited myself for a while, a mixture of square foot companion planting.
Okay.
And what that would look like is, so there's a girl local here. She lives in an apartment. She has I think her balcony is 3 foot by 6 foot.
Okay.
And she was like, "What can I do?" I was like, "Well, we're gonna get you some containers planted." And went over there, mapped out her balcony. I was like, "How much sitting space do you want? How much garden space?" She was like, "1 chair, fill the rest up with vegetables." I was like, "Cool." So went to Home Depot. We got some 5-gallon buckets. Home Depot has these wonderful heavy-duty black plastic totes. Picked up enough of those to line the railing and where her apartment is. We had the challenge that she was facing east and not south. So I had to plan around that and look at which vegetables would do well in the shade down here, which South Mississippi, it gets really hot in the summertime.
Right.
So we can do arugula, spinach, lettuce, things like that. The leafy greens will handle the shade really, really well. So what we ended up doing is like she had 2 5-gallon buckets. We did potatoes in those. So 3 inches of dirt in the bottom. She put her seed potato in, 11 inches of dirt on top, and just let it grow like that. Yeah, I know a lot of people will, they pile dirt as the potato plant grows. They pile dirt as the potato plant grows. One thing I do is the potato plant, I mean, you can't get obsessive like 3 feet deep. But if you plant it a foot deep or a foot and a half deep, it will shoot up through that.
Right.
You don't have to do that dirt thing. So we did 11 inches on top of the seed potato so that it had 11 inches of growth before the green, I call the green cap, popped out. And then inside the potato, we did, I'm trying to think, I think we planted parsley just once. So we planted parsley around the potato in the same bucket. So the parsley was already growing well. And we did maybe cilantro. We did another herb in the other bucket. So by the time the potato had reached the top and began shooting out, the herbs had already grown pretty well, and the potato wasn't going to shade them out. In the totes, she wanted, we did a tomato in one tote. Then around the tomato, we planted basil. And then around the basil, we planted beans, bush beans. So by the time the basil got tall enough, and it's almost like the Three Sisters gardening,
right,
the Americans used to do. So you have to time it. So you can't plant everything and let it go. So once the tomato reached, which she bought a start, so the tomato was already tall enough. We did a tomato, planted the basil. Once the basil got up to about 8 inches, we planted the beans. So we gave everything a head start over the next one.
Yeah.
And she didn't replace her grocery bill, but by the time we were done, she had squash growing out of hanging baskets down the railings. She had tomatoes and potatoes and cucumbers coming up the other side of the rail. Like, we started using the balcony setup itself instead of buying trellises and everything to help everything grow. And when you walked out onto her balcony, she had her seat to the right, which was just a little stool, and she was just surrounded by green.
I love it.
And she did really well that year. She's moved away now, but she moved purposely to a 1 acre plot.
Oh, nice.
A little house on it, just so she could grow from what she was at.
Wow. That's so cool. I love that. And honestly, I tell people this, and then I know that they maybe think I sound stupid or something like that, or like that it's not that impactful, but people say, like, how do I get started? And I say, like, literally just do a container and potatoes, because potatoes are actually like a huge calorie crop relative to a lot of stuff in the garden, and just see what you can make. And even that process is like, whoa, look at what we were able to produce in such a small amount of space, without much commitment. And, you know, and it's also great to show kids, you know, like, look, we can do this, let's water this, and then let's harvest it. And just getting that in their head about how it works to plant something and then harvest it and then eat it in the kitchen, to just see that whole process. You don't need almost anything to get started with that kind of setup. And it's extremely empowering, and it's always like a gateway drug. It always just leads to something else.
You know, when I was mentoring, that's what I challenged them with, was put a potato in a 5-gallon bucket. Let's go. Let's try something.
Yes.
And they did. And the students loved it, and they learned something. And the ones I talked to afterwards to talk to me directly felt empowered, exactly like you said.
Yeah. Totally.
And, you know, looking at that 5-gallon bucket, like, I grew that. And then when they actually harvested it, got to eat some of the potatoes out of it, you know, it's a whole different feeling knowing that you raised that and you harvested that and you prepared it, and all that's your hard work. Right.
And then you can, look at what you can show for it. And then you actually bring it into the kitchen, and it's like an actual product that you're going to eat in your life. It's amazing. I think we're just so disempowered in general, like, as consumers, that our only power as consumer is to be a consumer, to make enough money so that we can consume anything we want, as opposed to, there's just something really magical and different about producing. Briefly, before we move on, I wanted to ask you to describe what square foot gardening is, just to give people a little taste of that, because I think that's a pretty common one for a small garden. Get people started with that if they're interested.
Okay. I'll use corn. So a typical corn row, you would plant rows 12 inches apart from each other, and then you would have the corn plants thin to 12 inches from each other, right? And that's how your big ag plants their corn and everything. So in square foot gardening, what you learn is there's enough space in 1 square foot. You're literally creating a square in the dirt. That's 1 foot by 1 foot. And you can divide that into 4 smaller squares, 6 smaller squares, 9 smaller squares. And what I teach, or what I practice and teach, is, well, you can fit 4 corn plants in that 1 square foot.
Right.
Corn needs to be in blocks anyway, because so it can pollinate. But then we divide that into 9 from there. And then you can plant beans around the corn. You can plant 9 beans in that same square foot.
Right.
And we're getting into 3 sisters here. And well, once you have a 6 by 6 square, 6 foot by 6 foot, and you have math isn't a thing this morning. Was that 24 corn plants?
Yeah.
Now you can put a squash plant or a pumpkin plant the dead middle of that 6 foot square.
Right.
So now you have corn, and you have beans, and you have squash, all growing in 36 square foot of area. Versus if you just did a 6 by 6 plot of corn, you would have 36 corn plants and nothing else growing there.
Right. And then on top of it, a lot of people tend to start by doing row plants, because that's what they've seen, which the reason people do rows is because they work with machines. I mean, like, you can harvest things in industrial setting by planting them all straight in a row, and then the machines can pick them all up. They plant them all straight and they harvest them all straight. But there's nothing that's stopping a small scale gardener from doing any kind of configuration. And the square foot is nice because I think that they tell you in the square foot gardening book to make it like at the biggest 10 feet by 10 feet, because then you can reach to the middle. But
yes.
Basically the idea is you just make a box and you walk around the outside of the box, and you work in those kind of squares as opposed to rows, which actually waste a lot of space because you have a lot of walking paths between rows.
Right. I personally do 5x5 squares.
Okay.
That's it. And a lot of that's for my children. You know, I have an 8-year-old, so it's a lot easier for her to get in there and work with me.
Right.
In a 5 foot by 5 foot square.
Yeah.
And we have 1 foot of walking path between each square.
Okay.
So you go out there and look, there's just square after square after square and all these little paths going between them.
Yep. Speaking of that, how has it been with the kids these past 10 years? Tell me a little bit about what that's been like, having them be involved.
Well, I started when my daughter was first born. It was really the first year of that. So she was too small. So she's been raised with it.
Okay.
All she's ever known is Dad does a garden in the summer.
Okay.
The youngest boy, he's never really had an interest.
Okay.
In gardening. He's my bookworm.
Okay.
he would rather be tucked away in the corner of his room reading a book.
Yeah.
And then the oldest boy, so the boys are my stepsons.
Okay.
And just to clarify that, I'm the only dad the youngest boy knows. He was 3 when me and his mom got together.
Okay.
The oldest boy was 9. It took a couple years for him to get involved, and a lot of background I won't go into detail on, but basically his real dad became non-existent, and once he accepted that I was dad,
right,
he began to be more active in the garden and with the chickens and with the goats. And now at almost 20 years old, that this is his dream. He wants a big 5-10 acre farm and tiny house, and like you said earlier, having trouble finding a woman that shares those. So 20 years old, never had a girlfriend because he can't find one that has the same interest as him. But
young ladies out there, get in touch with Joseph if you're interested in homesteading somewhere in the deep South. Maybe he can screen you for his son. Potential girlfriend. I honestly get messages all the time from young women who are like, I can't find a man who's interested in this. I'm like, you gotta I don't know how do you just have to run in different circles. I don't know if you go to the farmer's market, and I wanted to ask you about the farmer's market too. It is kind of a nice way, it seems, to meet other homesteading families, and then potentially your kids are there, you make friends with them, the kids know we're both raised this way, so maybe they end up making friends with each other. I'm wondering how that's been, the farmers, I know you guys go there regularly, how the farmers market has been in your experience.
The main one we do, we've been there, we're going into our 3rd season at the market. We've made really good friends with a couple other families. My wife, she now has her group of her and 3 other women, all moms and wives. And then once a month they go out and do their thing. But my daughter will have her pick of young men. The bad part for my older kids is most of the families have younger kids.
Right. Okay.
A lot of younger families, younger than me and my wife. My wife's the oldest in her clique, and we didn't have my daughter till we were in our 30s.
Right.
So yeah, she's got her pick of young men that are country boys, and the lady that does the main vegetable vendor, her kid, he's branched off. He's now growing his own garden, and he has his own booth. He's selling his own vegetables. He's 9.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's the cutest, coolest thing. Like, I have chickens, but I always go buy a dozen eggs from him every week. Just, just for encouragement more than anything.
That is so cute. Yeah, and I know Roxanne was saying it had, like, at least for her, this is Happy Holistic Homestead for those who don't know. She was saying at her farmer's market, like, they also kind of at the end of the market each time do a little informal swap of things they haven't sold and that have too much of. And I'm like, oh, how cool. It's like really informal economies there.
Yeah, we have we have down home mushrooms, which they have this beautiful little small scale mushroom growing setup. And her husband, which means he almost become good friends, he is a lover of bread, all things bread. And I sell baked bread. So at the end of the every week, I come home with mushrooms and he goes home with bread.
Nice.
The main vegetable lady, I took home a small kiddie pool worth of corn last year for $20.
Okay.
She had it left over. She's like, we don't want to haul this back out next week. I got 34 quarts of corn out of that once I processed it and canned it all.
That's a lot.
It is a lot of corn. And so yeah, absolutely. We everybody swaps around. When the last 30 minutes of market as it's dying down, we'll get out of our booth and start walking to other people's booths.
Right.
We pay cash for some things. We swap for some things.
Yeah, that's great.
It's not so much my wife's booth with the candles and the soap and things like that, but those of us with perishables, vegetables, mushrooms, fruits, bread.
You gotta get it. Yeah, you don't need 10 loaves of bread or whatever at home, but you can swap them for other stuff, which is.
I got half a deep freezer full of frozen bread loaves.
Okay. That's another way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll freeze and maintain quality for 10 months.
Yeah.
So, but it gets to the point where you're like, I got 20 loaves of bread in the deep freezer. I don't want to take anything home with me.
Yes. Right. So, exactly.
Yeah, a lot of swapping.
That's so fun. Okay, so I'd also like to hear a little bit more about your animals and how you do goats and chickens on top of the garden in such a small plot. How do you run them? Yeah, like what is the approach you take with the animals?
All right, so the garden and the chickens are very closely connected to each other.
Okay.
In that I have really bad soil here. It's mostly sand, not a lot of organic matter in it. And so I don't free range my chickens. I don't chicken track my chickens. They are in a run for a specific reason. So they spend 2 years in that run, and then I move that run.
Okay.
Where the run was at is my new garden area.
Okay.
So it's always rotating around so the chickens can keep the soil basically fertilized. With the goats and the sheep, I use all electric goat netting fencing.
Okay.
That we can move around. So it is a lot of rotational grazing. My goats and sheep don't spend more than 2 or 3 days in one spot.
Okay.
And then I intentionally let the backside of the property grow up. They go back there once every 3 months.
Got it.
I just let it go wild, and then I send them back there to clear it all down.
That's so great. How did you first hear about rotational grazing to be able to set up a system like that? Because I honestly feel like different people are coming to it at different stages. Was it that just part of all your homesteading reading, or like how did you get into that?
I had read about it, but hadn't practiced it. It was kind of like something I come across, read, okay, that's neat, and kept going. And that was really before we got in. At that time, we had like 2 goats.
Okay.
And we had 100-foot by 100-foot permanent fencing area. And that was sufficient for 2 goats.
Okay.
On top of we were still feeding grain and hay, supplementing the grass.
Right.
And as farm math happens, you're never happy with 2. You're going to end up with 6 or 10 or I think we're ordering 70 chickens this spring.
70?
70.
Oh my God. Farm math. Explain what farm math is.
Uh, farm math is where you buy 2 chickens and you go buy feed, and they have some chickens on sale, so you come back with 2 bags of feed and 4 more chickens. And then the next time you come out with 8 more chickens.
Yeah.
Or somebody's in the parking lot of Tractor Supply with a goat in the back of their truck, and they're like, "Hey, $50, I need to get rid of this." And you're like, "I could use another goat." Everything multiplies whether you plan on it or not.
Right.
So we're doing chickens because of the egg shortage that's going on.
Right.
We're going to try to capitalize on that this year.
Great.
So I figure farm raised at $6 a dozen. I'm $2 cheaper than Walmart on their dozen, and I could actually might make some money off of them this time.
Yeah.
But rotational grazing. So as we multiplied our goat herd, and we ended up with 6 goats and then 8 goats, I walked back there one day and I got to noticing, I'm like, I got some bare spots, and then my goats got worms.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, this ain't good. So I got to doing some research, and we're like, when they're forced to eat low to the ground like that, that's where the parasite load is. And I was like, well, we got to do something about this. And we've talked about in the class about how don't put up permanent fencing until you know for sure.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I gotta. So we're throwing up permanent fencing temporary. So we got rolls of cattle or goat fencing, and we're running metal stakes in the ground.
Okay.
And we're letting them graze this area, and it's getting low. And I'm like, all right, I got to move this. So we got to put them all back in the dirt paddock at this point and move the fence around. It became such a huge pain.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, all right, well, we can put up permanent fencing with gates and move them around. Or that's when I started looking into the netting.
Right.
And, those things, you just pull them out of the ground, move it, stick it back in the ground, and you're good.
Right.
So it come down to me not researching well enough, and my animals suffered for that.
Right.
And I felt really bad about that.
Well, and a lot of people, so just to clarify for people who don't know much about grazing animals, a lot of the conventional way to do it in modern agriculture is basically to just toss the animals in an open paddock, and they can just graze at will. And it's a relatively new thing to think about moving them with electric, either netting, or they have strings, these wires that you can string up like 2 or 3 that won't hold goats, but usually it'll hold a cow if you've got strong enough electricity. And basically you're trying to move the animals through the landscape in a way that mimics how natural predators would move ruminants through a landscape, where they eat and trample hard in one spot, and then they move along and let that spot rest for a long time, and then don't come back to it until the grass is fully recovered, and all the manure they dropped and all the trampling they dropped all turns into soil health, soil carbon, all sorts of good stuff. And so, it's a relatively new thing that we have the technology to move these animals through this way. And a lot of people, I think, when they do it the conventional way, that, like you were saying, Joseph, they have problems with parasites, the animals suffer. You can tell that the land is overgrazed and it starts to get bare. And so it's really just a relatively new thing that people are coming to, but then they realize, like, wow, this is actually pretty amazing in terms of like the outcomes for the animal and the landscape, just with this little electrical fencing that you can use and move around pretty easily. A lot of times you can just run it on solar panels that come with it.
Mine run on a solar panel.
Yeah. So that, just a little background information, but once you figure it out, and then you can do like an experimental process of how quickly do I move them through? How big do I make the paddocks? It differs by different times of year. Like in spring, I don't know how the climate impacts your growth down there, but like in spring, it's usually pretty lush and everything grows super fast. And then through the summer, if it's like dry, for example, it slows down. So you kind of just adapt constantly with moving them through.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate that we're very wet here.
Right.
So when I move them out of one area, it really don't take a couple of weeks.
Wow.
And the grass is back to knee high, and the natural weeds and vegetation are starting to come back in. But it rains a lot here.
Right.
I think we're like the third wettest place in the nation.
Oh my God. So it's easy for, you're never going to really have like dry or bare patches from lack of water.
Right. It's why I love where I'm at, and I probably will never leave. This homesteading minus hurricanes is so easy here.
Right. Yeah.
Climate and weather, I grow 12 months out of the year.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, the last thing I wanted to ask you about is, without revealing where you live, I'm curious, I'm assuming your community isn't you're not necessarily in a fancy city, or I'm wondering who are the consumers at the farmers market? Are there other people around you who are obviously the people at the farmers market too? Is there a culture of homesteading growing? Does it seem like there's more and more families getting into it? I'm just wondering, what's the landscape like where you are? I'm assuming just a small-ish town in the deep South. I hear a lot about what's going on in New England, where a lot of rich people from New York are moving in to these rural areas. I have no idea what the landscape is like where you are. So I'm curious your cultural assessment of what's going on there, if you see any trends or anything like that.
10 years ago, this was unheard of. You couldn't find a market anywhere.
Okay.
5 years ago, really, you couldn't find a market anywhere. Everything we were doing for ourselves.
Okay.
And we met, I bought some rabbits from somebody. It was another young family. They were about our age. And we became friends with them. And that was kind of we're the only people we know like this in this whole area. So in the last 5 years, we've had markets popping up everywhere.
Okay.
And they're still full of a lot of people doing T-shirts and sublimated drinking cups and okay. A lot of them not very
homesteady stuff, more just crafts and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's still a lot of that, but I'm happy to see that. I'm happy to see something's happening.
Yeah.
But there are more. The mushroom people, they're new. This is their first year. I started the bakery. I just helped somebody get their bakery started a few weeks ago. They're going to be doing another market that's about 20 miles south of me.
Nice.
And because I can't do in my kitchen, I can't bake enough for more than one market a week right now.
Wow.
So I'm let's get this going. Mississippi law makes meat and cheese impossible at markets for now. I'm hoping they fix that soon. But it's growing. It is growing. Where I'm at, my particular incorporated township has a population of 1,200 people.
Okay.
And that's over a very large area. And
so it's small.
the town itself, the actual city limits, has 400 people.
Okay.
It's three roads of houses, 5 churches, and a Dollar General. And that's all that's there.
Yeah.
They only have a gas station. You got to go 10 miles down the road for a gas station.
Okay.
So that's where we chose to locate our market at, though. We are 25, 30 minutes north of the second largest city in Mississippi.
Okay.
We are about the same from the largest college town in the state.
Okay.
And Mississippi's had a lot of growth in the industry. They're bringing in a lot from California, from Texas. They're getting a lot of people to move here. NOAA is setting up a brand new facility here on the coast. Okay. So we're starting to get a lot of influx from other states. There's no market culture, no homegrown organic culture in South Mississippi when I moved here. But I think with the influx of these people from other parts of the country that have those, if you go to, I met a guy the other day from Seattle. This has been going on for a long time in Seattle.
Right. Yeah.
He was excited to meet a artisan bread maker.
Okay.
He was like, I will be there this weekend. And he's like, you can't find it anywhere. I was like, yeah, it's still getting going. And so that's what the outlook looks like. It's beginning to pick up, and that's because of people coming in from other places.
I get it, yeah.
And with that happening, I think more of the locals are beginning to pick up on it.
Okay.
So now that when they drive by, I've had more than one person this year go, I drive by here all the time. How long have y'all been doing this?
Right.
This is our second year. It's every Saturday. Oh, okay. I'm just never by on a Saturday. I'll start coming by.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of military around here, but where our market's at, it's not near the bases, so we don't get a lot of military people. But down towards the coast, some of the markets that are kicking up down there, they have a big military presence coming to their markets.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, people from other parts of the country that's used to this kind of thing are now able to start finding it down here.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, I just feel like I know that a lot of people have critiques of like, farmers markets and, it's all these, like yuppies from cities or whatever. But if people appreciate and support these small businesses and small scale production, handmade, high quality, like, I just feel like this is a good thing. This is just like unequivocally a good thing to have people supporting that kind of production and not necessarily just going to Walmart or Dollar General for whatever they need to get, but like maybe actually supporting these small businesses. Yeah, I just think it's good. I know that there's like downsides for, yuppies moving into places and changing the character and stuff, but I just love the idea that, you get to make this high quality stuff, like highest quality, your animals are treated great. It's great for you and your family. It's something you enjoy. Like we just need, I just think about it also in terms of like national sovereignty, like access to food if there's ever shortages of anything. You want to have in your community a bunch of little businesses where people are producing stuff in case that there's, some kind of shortage. You're like, well, I know in my community I've got X, Y, and Z person down the road who all make eggs and I can access them no matter what happens to the industrial system.
Yeah.
So I love that. I feel really hopeful about the direction things are going in terms of small businesses popping up, even like people who you just make a few things and it's not your whole job, but it's a little thing you do on the side. I think of Roxanne's kids. I think they started doing bread, like the oldest daughter, I think started selling on her own at the farmer's market, I think bread and baked goods. And what a cool thing to teach your kids how to do. I just think I just fully support all of the above,
Yeah, we have, I guess about 7 miles from my house, there's a dairy farm, and they've sold to Board and Milk for years.
Okay.
Which is one of the big national or regional milk producers. They just got their license this past June. They are now their own creamery. I can go to their farm and buy, and it is $1 more a gallon, but it is so much better.
Yeah.
Than buying it from a grocery store.
Right.
And with baking, their milk has a very high cream content.
Right.
So it's improved. Shopping there has improved my local business. My bread is fluffier and softer, and with all that cream content in it. And they've grown tremendously. I've grown really well. I'm looking at probably in the next year actually opening a brick and mortar bakery in the town.
Nice. Oh, cool.
The demand's getting so high I can't keep up with it.
Right. You need actual commercial ovens.
Yeah, and there's other bakeries around here, but down here everybody does cakes, cupcakes, cookies.
Right.
Nobody does bread. Okay. I do just bread, French bread, Italian bread, sandwich bread. Like it's just white bread.
Right.
And I sell out every weekend just about.
Wow.
So there's a culture growing and a market building where I'm at. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a lot of growth here as far as localism goes.
That's great.
And we're being helped by like the egg shortage. There's a supply where I'm at, but eggs were $2 a dozen 2 years ago. They're now $7 a dozen.
Whoa.
So we haven't run out of supplies on a lot of things down here on the coast, but the price has gone through the roof on a lot of stuff.
Right.
It's actually getting to the point now. I was at the grocery store the other day. Milk was $5.89 a gallon. I'm like, I pay $6 at the creamery. So it's getting to the point where localism is the same price or even cheaper on some things.
Right.
So my fresh farm eggs is $6 a dozen. You can pay $7 or $8 a dozen for commercial eggs at the grocery store, or you can buy my chickens laid on yesterday or this morning.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, this is a very doomer optimism thing. A lot of us think that small scale localism, all this kind of stuff isn't going to take off until it's kind of forced to, because people don't necessarily choose out of the goodness of their heart to spend more money. Some people do if they have it, but not in like a wide spread scale. But when you get economic things that just macroeconomic forces that make it so that things are basically the same cost or more on the industrial scale, my hope and our doomer optimism whole thing is I hope that sort of forces people to make different choices, both in terms of getting into production, hey man, I can make a small business out of this and make a killing right now. And it's not that hard. It's not that hard to get started with chickens and to produce eggs in my backyard. And you could make a real business out of it. And then, consumers too, hey, well, why wouldn't I go support this local business as opposed to Walmart or wherever, if it's the same price or even less, so it's that's a very doomer optimism point that I'm like, people say to us, you're hoping for the industrial system to fail. And I'm just like, I'm not necessarily hoping for it, but I just think it's inevitable. Because it requires so much input of fossil fuels and resources and subsidies to keep afloat. And it would be much better if we had a million different local businesses doing things regeneratively and, resilient local communities. So I'm not necessarily hoping for the system to break down, but I think it's going to happen. It is happening. And then I hope that people respond in time, making out these little businesses. And it seems like it's happening little by little, You still there, Joseph? You're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
What was I saying? It's the great thing about market is you get to meet vendors and you get to meet locals. You get to talk to people.
Right.
One thing I'm noticing as all these prices are raising up on everything is people are talking to me and they're beginning to shift their own mentalities from, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a guy and he's like, when I saw him, he had 2 arms full of bags.
Okay.
And I sold him a market bag that's reusable that we had handmade, and he was able to fit 3 of his bags in that one. But that's kind of beside the point. But we were talking about the mentality shift. He's like, I've always been one that when I get off work, I swing by the grocery store, grab whatever I need for dinner. He goes, but I'm beginning to think more on a week by week basis.
Right.
So he's now doing a majority of his grocery shopping at a farmer's market.
Nice.
And buying what he needs for the week.
Right.
And he told me, he's like, I actually enjoy it. He enjoys getting out, walking around, talking to the vendors, right, seeing what everybody has. He enjoys planning out his week ahead. It's vegetables, bread, and mushroom, honey. Those are kind of the eating staples at the market right now. But that's going to grow. Mississippi's working on some stuff. I'm hoping they're going to loosen milk laws soon. I'm hoping they're going to loosen milk laws, cheese,
meat.
Yeah, and meat, and I've kind of gotten around Mississippi's law. So if you come to my farm and buy a goat, you want a goat meat, put it in your freezer. I cannot sell you butchered meat. I can sell you the live goat.
Yes.
And then I can take you to the building out back and quote unquote teach you how to butcher a goat.
Yes. Right.
So you will come here, pay me for the goat, and you will leave with butchered meat.
Right.
And I haven't broken any laws.
Yeah.
I've instructed you on, you can use personal facilities for butchery.
Right. Right.
So there are ways around it, but I'm hoping Mississippi gets a little more lax on it.
And anyone who wants to buy meat, they do have to do that process, as opposed to, hey, you can just butcher it and sell it in pieces at the farmer's market. You're going to get access to a lot more consumers if you can do that. However, you know what I've heard? I don't know if you heard about this, Joseph. Joel Salatin and a different guy were running this conference a couple months back, and I was looking into it. I think it was called the Rogue Food Conference. And basically, it was a bunch of people who did versions of what you just described, depending on the regulations of their different states, and were inventing new ways to go around the laws, which are stupid and usually favor industrial producers. So that's why we want to skirt them. I'm just, for the audience, this is why we want to skirt them. They favor industrial producers, and they make it difficult for small scale producers. But one of the things that somebody came up with is you can do like a membership, a private club with a membership fee. And that skirts a lot of regulations where you're like, you are buying a membership to our meat club. And then inside the meat club, we're exchanging for no money. That kind of thing or you made, and I don't know, depending on the different, somebody made like, I think it was like a church. It was incorporated as a church because that was like the easiest thing to do in their state, to make an organization. It was like, yeah, we're just all members of this church. And there's like, we're donating to the church, quote unquote. And then, you donate however much the meat costs. Yeah. So that kind of thing, which I'm all for, because I know, I'm just going to say, for the record, of course, we want to make sure people have quality facilities and they're doing stuff the right way and they're acting humanely to the animals. But more often than not, on the smaller scale, you're going to be way more humane to animals than you would be on the industrial scale. And all of the regulations just favor the big guys because, they mostly write them. So I'm all for getting people access to these local products.
I tell people all the time, my animal is going to give its life for food. I want it to have a good life.
Right.
Well, got it. And then when we do the teaching sessions, my facility is very clean.
Right.
I'm very particular about it because, like I tell them, I process my family's food here.
Right.
So I'm not going to give you something I won't give and that goes with soap and bread and everything else we do. Right. Yeah. When we need a bar of soap, I go to my market stash and I take a bar of soap, take it to the bathroom. Right. So it's everything. When you get local, that's what you're getting a lot of time. And I know there's people out there that puts a bad flavor in your mouth, but most of the time you're going to get what that family itself is doing. So if it's good enough for this guy's wife and kids, then it's going to be good enough for yours.
Right. And you're incentivized to do it well, because first and foremost, it's for you and your family. So you're not going to cut corners. You're not going to put your family at risk. So, which is different from the industrial guys who primarily sell off farm, and aren't really producing for themselves at all. So yeah, that's actually a huge finding from my dissertation work too. When people start to produce for themselves and they see it with their own eyes, they choose good practices, because why wouldn't they? They're the ones, it's their own backyard, it's their own soil, it's their own bodies they're putting it into, so they're incentivized to do it. Yes. Okay, any last thoughts? Anything we haven't covered that you feel like it just needs to get on the Doomer Optimism podcast, needs to be said to the world, where, I don't know, maybe questions you get on Twitter that you just are like, you know what, go back and listen to my podcast with Ashley. I explained it there. Because there's a couple of times I've been on this podcast like, you know what, people keep asking me why we moved to Uruguay. I'm just going to describe it here so I can say, go back to episode 101 and all. And that's where I describe it. Anything like that where you feel like you got to get it out there?
I think we covered that, because the question I get asked most is, why had I even started?
Okay.
But I would like, I know you got listeners that are new and listeners that are old to this life. So I did pose a question on Twitter that I would love anybody wants to contact me and give me their thoughts, or just something to think about on your own. Overrated vegetables in your garden.
Okay.
It's been on my mind a lot.
Okay.
People will plant way too many tomatoes or way too many cucumbers. Like what's overrated? Like what can we do different with our gardens to make it more productive, give us what we need, and not have an overabundance of something else?
Yeah. And you know what reminds me of, you brought this up in the Homesteading 101 class that we ran together. You said don't plant food in your garden that you don't eat. And a lot of people have these aspirational gardens where they plant like a row of kale and like never ate kale in their lives. And now they're just like, I'm going to eat healthy now because I've got this garden. Like plant stuff that's nutrient dense. That's stuff you normally buy at the store. Plant it, and don't be shy about it. Obviously, grain is a little complicated and it's harder than, potatoes or something like that. But
right.
Great question, because I think people overplant probably cucumbers and a lot of vegetables that they don't necessarily eat, maybe too many salad greens and they're not necessarily eating all those. Like that's a really big question. So you sent this out in a tweet, Joseph. I can link to the tweet below the episode so people can click on it and respond. Okay.
There's my little advice for new and old gardeners. I told you I have 5x5 squares.
Yeah.
I set aside 1 square every year to plant something I've never grown before and never eaten before. The rest is stuff I know me and my family eats. One is experimental.
Right.
So I'm not using a ton of garden space. So if we like it, it can go into the bigger garden next year. If we don't like it, I'll scratch it and we go on to something else. So it's great to experiment. Just don't spend a lot of time and energy on it.
Yes. I love that. Yeah, that's good advice. Joseph, also, you have some things on Gumroad. I want you to send me those links so I can let listeners follow up and get some of your knowledge. Joseph was a mentor in my homesteading class and my home economics class, and he is just the best and has I just feel like there's a lot of new homesteaders out there who kind of like immediately just start a YouTube channel and make themselves into like micro celebrities. And I feel like not to just gas myself up, but I found these people like Joseph and like Roxanne and like Jordan who don't necessarily self-promote that much, who know so much and are great mentors and have great information. I feel like part of my responsibility is to try to signal boost. These guys are out there experimenting. You guys are newbies. If you want information, you can always reach out to Joseph. I think you should do like some consulting. People are looking more and more into, can I get somebody who's done it in the South, for example, to sit down for an hour and I pay you, $50 to look at my property and tell me how to even get started, that kind of stuff. Joseph's got, I think you have books. You have a couple books on Gumroad, right?
I have a beginner's gardener's ebook. Okay. So it's like people that's never touched dirt before.
Right.
So this is basic. And then I have a couple of presentations on there now that it's name your own price. It's free if you don't have the money for it. I would love if you pay me $5, but it's out there. It's for free. I know a lot of people can't do anything right now.
Yeah.
And I just want to help as many people as I can get going. But I appreciate you because I am so terrible at self-promotion.
And you know what? And I'm bad at it too, but I'm very good and I love promoting other people who I feel like need the promotion. I love it. I couldn't think of anything I enjoy more. Oh, yeah. The whole point of the podcast, basically.
Roxanne's book, I plastered it everywhere. So
yes.
I gotta get rid of this.
Yes, exactly. So go support Joseph. He's doing the good work of making localism happen. And he's got really great information to help you out too. He's been through it. He's made mistakes. So you go give him $5 for his books. It would be great to support people in our network. All right. Padre, always a pleasure. I'm so glad that you came on. And we don't have a lot of Southerners in our network, so we have a lot of like Northeasterners. I mean, we've got Jason in the Southeast, but Deep South is rare to find, so it's very cool.
Yeah, it gets kind of lonely down here in these circles.
Yeah, I know.
I'm in a Telegram chat group. I went and found somebody to bring into the chat group just to have another Deep Southerner with me.
Yes. So you're the vanguard in the Deep South. So everybody look to Padre if you are a Deep Southerner and looking to get started. He's got the experience with the wet climate down there, wet and hot, that not a lot of people have, to be honest. And maybe they've started homesteading, but in, Vermont or something, it's definitely different and needs a different set of expertise and thinking about how do you do things there. So anyways, go support Joseph. This podcast will come out in a couple weeks, and I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.